All rise. The Superior Court of Milton County is now in session. Our Honorable Judge Kevin Nelson presiding. God save the state and this honorable court.
Good afternoon. Please be seated. We are here in the matter of State of South Carolina versus Barbara Allen Barrett, cause number 859134. Are the parties ready to proceed? All right. I will now ask the attorney, Betger, for the prosecution to please stand and introduce the other members of your team.
Owen Ronigan and Samuel Welch.
Thank you. And now I will ask attorney Paul, is it Jelinas?
No.
For defense? I apologize. Who is the lead defense counsel?
Bryce, stand up.
Bryce? All right, would you please identify the other members of your team?
Audrey Greenfield and Georgie Vanderpop.
Thank you. All right, are there any pre-trial motions before we get going today? Not from the plaintiff, not from the defense. All right, I will now ask the bailiff to escort the jury in.
All rise.
Please be seated. All right, thank you all for being here today. This is a very difficult role that you have as jurors. And I'm going to go through a few things that I'd like you to keep in mind throughout this process. First of all, by definition, there are always two sides to every story. I'm going to ask you to keep an open mind as you hear both the prosecution and the defense. I'm going to ask that you not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else until the case is completed. Once the case is completed, then you'll have an opportunity to discuss this with yourselves, render a verdict, and after that you can discuss the case with whomever you would like. The way this trial is going to go today is the state will have an opportunity to make an opening statement. After that, the defense will have an opportunity to make an opening statement. Then you will start hearing actual evidence in this case. Evidence can come from either witnesses or from tangible items, such as other evidence, documents, pictures, recordings, things of that nature. All of the evidence can be used by both sides, and just because one side introduces evidence does not mean that it is necessarily adverse to the other side. You are to take all of the evidence together and then render your decision based upon that. After the prosecution's case, the defense will have the opportunity to present the case. Please keep in mind that the defendant does not have to make a statement. The defendant has a constitutional right not to speak, but may choose to do so. Following the defense case, you will hear closing arguments first from the defense and then from the prosecution. At that point, I will ask you to retire to your chambers to deliberate until you have an opportunity to reach a verdict. I will now ask the attorney for the state to please make the first opening statement.
May it please the court, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Bella Becker, and these are my co-counsels, Owen Ronigan and Samuel Welch. On the night of December 18, 1988, a horribly ruthless crime was committed. After discovering her husband wanted to leave her for another woman, the defendant, Barbara Barrett, shot her husband 6 times in cold blood. The issue we are here for today is to determine whether or not Barbara Barrett is guilty of first-degree murder or manslaughter. Or in other words, did she plan to kill her husband or not? The defense might try and prove that Barbara suffered emotional and physical abuse at the hand of her husband, and that is why she shot him. Sadly, many women do experience this, and we're so very sorry if Mrs. Barrett experienced this. Yet, does this warrant murder? Mr. Barrett wanted out of their marriage. He proclaimed so with his words as well as his actions. This should have been no surprise to Barbara, as she caught him cheating on her numerous times throughout their years together. Earlier, she even discovered a letter from John to his lover, stating that he would leave Barbara soon. Barbara could have been free from his cheating and ill-tempered ways, but this is not how that story ends. This story ends with a letter, a gun, and a murder. According to State v. Johnson, malice is the wrongful intent to injure another and indicates wicked or depraved spirit intent on doing wrong. We will prove Barbara had malicious intent with 4 main pieces of evidence. First, the defendant was shooting a gun earlier the very same day of the murder. Second, she was seen by the housekeeper, Lee Porter, running after John into the dining room with the murder weapon in her hands. Third, John wanted to leave Barbara, as he stated in the letter Barbara found. The very same letter that was clenched in Mr. Barrett's hands when he was found dead. And lastly, John Barrett was not shot at once, but 6 times, with a lethal shot to the back of the head. We will bring 3 witnesses to the stand today. First, we will call on Sam Chaney, the police officer who was dispatched to the scene of the crime on the night of the murder. Second, Joe R. May, the coroner who examined Mr. Barrett's body. And lastly, Lee Porter, who was a direct witness to the scene of the crime. We will prove to you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Barbara Barrett had malicious intent when she killed her husband. And we appeal to you, members of the jury, to convict Barbara Barrett of first-degree murder. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. We will now hear from defense counsel for the opening statement.
Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Mr. Lindsay, and I will be making the opening remarks in this case. Allow me to introduce my co-counsel, Ms. Greenfield and Ms. Vanderhoff, as well as our client, Barbara Barrett. This case is about how Mrs. Barrett has been wrongfully accused of murdering her husband with malice and forethought. The evidence will show that Mrs. Barrett was a battered woman, trapped in a marriage with no way out, even though she reached out to several professionals for help. We will produce a amount of evidence that will make your job easier in determining that Mrs. Barrett acted in a way to preserve her own life and not in a way that makes her a cold-blooded killer, like the prosecution will try to manipulate you into believing. Our witness, Dan McGuire, is a professional psychologist in the field of battered women. Abuse among women is a national crisis, and Ms. McGuire has laid the groundwork for our nation to address this serious issue. As a well-respected individual in her field, Ms. McGuire's testimony will show that Mrs. Barrett is a classic case of a battered woman who suffered at the hands of her husband for years. This triggered Mrs. Barrett's inability to break free because of learned helplessness. Our client, Barbara Barrett, is from Haddonfield, South Carolina. She is the mother of 2 teenage children who she devotes her time and energy to. Mrs. Barrett is well known in the community for her willingness to organize and host charity events. Today, you will learn Mrs. Barrett is not a perfect woman. She stayed in an unhealthy and abusive relationship where the violence escalated as the years passed. Mrs. Barrett will tell the story of her marriage, how it started and how it progressed to Mr. Barrett slapping her across the face while his temper raged. This abuse escalated until Mrs. Barrett was hospitalized from Mr. Barrett punching her in the face and kicking her repeatedly after she fell. After each incident, Mr. Barrett persistently wooed her back into a relationship and his seductive arms. Mrs. Barrett did her best to please her husband. She even quit her charity work to devote more time to him. But 1 week before Mr. Barrett's death, circumstances changed. He frequently came home drunk and was verbally abusive. Mrs. Barrett endured his wrath. Then he beat her again just 5 days before his death with a belt. This same belt is a key fact in the night of his murder. Mrs. Barrett feared for her life. She feared her husband. She feared this would be his death. Mrs. Barrett only meant to stop him from beating her. She did not plan it. She did not want to do it. Nonetheless, she only defended herself on December 18, 1988 against such abuse because she absolutely had to. You, the jury, have been empowered to determine whether the allegations made by the state of South Carolina are true, whether Mrs. Barrett is guilty or not guilty. Your testimonies you will hear in this court today, we believe your conclusion will be that Mrs. Barrett used reasonable force to protect herself from bodily harm perpetrated on her by John Walker Barrett 3 to 4 times per year for 10 years, and therefore her actions are justified as self-defense. It is important that you, the jury, listen to all the testimonies so that you can decide if the prosecution has met their burden of proof. Remember, burden of proof is to prove beyond and to the conclusion of all reasonable doubt that Mrs. Barrett killed her husband. Think of reasonable doubt as a piece of twine. One frayed strand and the twine begins to unravel. Each unraveled strand establishes reasonable doubt. I submit to you that Barbara Barrett did not murder her husband. She acted in self-defense, which will be proven through the testimony of an expert in the field of battered women and all the evidence presented. At the end of this trial, I ask you to submit a verdict of not guilty.
Thank you. Is the prosecution prepared to call its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution will call Officer Sam Jones.
Please do.
Do you affirm that the evidence that you shall give in the trial and in the court and jury in the trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right. Please speak directly into the microphone. Please begin when you are ready.
May I please state your name for the record?
Yes, Officer C.M. Cheney,
How long have you worked for the Haddonfield Police Department?
7 years,
What is your main area of expertise?
collecting evidence.
Have you been on other homicide cases like this?
Yes, many.
Have you pursued a higher education in reform?
Yes, I have put in 9 hours towards my advanced degree in criminal justice at the Haddonfield University.
Your Honor, may we establish Officer Sam Cheney as an expert witness?
Any objection from the defense? Yes, sir. Beck.
Do you have a partner that you ride with?
Normally, but he was ill on the night of the murder.
On the night of the murder, what time did you receive the dispatch?
9:50 p.m.
And what time did you arrive at the scene of the crime?
9:57 p.m.
Can you describe the scene after you entered?
Yes, I was greeted at the door by the housemaid, Lee Porter, and I walked in. I saw blood spatters on the couch and leading towards the dining room. As I entered the dining room, I saw the gun resting near the deceased, John Walker Barrett, as well as a letter crumpled in his hand.
Based on what you saw from the scene, where would you say the first shot was fired?
While he was sitting on the couch.
And you also said there was blood leading to the kitchen. What would this imply?
That he was most likely shot on the couch and ran towards the dining room.
What type of What type of gun was next to the deceased?
38 Smith & Wesson.
Is this generally a self-defense firearm?
No.
How many shots were fired? from the
6.
gun? How many wounds were on the body?
5.
Where was the other bullet?
Located in the wall between the dining room and the living room.
Where did you locate the defendant?
Screaming in the bathroom.
Did you ask her if she was harmed or threatened in any way by her husband?
Yes.
What was her response?
No.
Do you have a specific recollection of reading her Miranda warnings?
Not specifically, but I do know that I make a habit of reading everybody I take into custody their Miranda rights.
And before Barbara Barrett signed her confession statement, did you read her Miranda warnings?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination from the defense.
Is it true you work an extra job?
Yes.
You can work 2 shifts in a row, correct?
Correct.
Because you work extra and take the late shift, is it possible that you were tired and may not have conducted an accurate report?
It is quite possible, yes.
Your regular hours are from 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., Tuesday through Saturday, correct?
Yes.
December 18th, 1988 was a Sunday, so you were working outside your regular hours, correct?
Correct.
Do you claim everything in your police report to be accurate?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I would like to enter the defense exhibit number 1 into evidence.
Any objection from the prosecution?
No, Your Honor.
May I please see exhibit number 1? Item 1 will be admitted as exhibit 1.
Can you please identify this for the jury?
Yes, this is the police report, the incident report, pardon me, that I filed to the Haddonfield Police Department.
Can you please tell the jury what the highlight in yellow says?
Yes, it says stranger to stranger, I marked yes.
So you marked it as stranger to stranger, implying Mrs. Barrett did not know her own husband, correct? Yes or no,
Yes.
please?
Yes.
Isn't it true you said in your police report that both of Mr. Barrett's legs were shot?
No.
Your Honor, at this time I would like to enter exhibit number 2, defense exhibit number 2 into evidence.
May I please see identification number 2? Any defense from the prosecution as to admission to identification number 2?
No, Your Honor.
Identification number 2 will be admitted as exhibit 2.
Can you please identify this for the jury?
Yes, I said one to the right, several bullet wounds to his body. Oh, sorry, I read that in the wrong order. One to the right back thigh.
Okay, can you please turn the page and read that?
Hitting him in the back left leg at the thigh area.
In your police report, you claim both of his legs were shot, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. You patrol the Glenhaven area, correct?
Yes.
Where did the call come from?
Objection, Your Honor.
Please state your objection.
Improper extrapolation of the stipulated facts.
Your response?
It does state that he got the call from the Gunmont area.
Please address all your responses to me. What is your response?
It does state in his report that he got the call from the Gunmont area, Your Honor.
Anything further from plaintiff?
No, Your Honor.
I will allow it. Please answer the question.
Could you repeat it, please?
Where did your call come from?
Pardon me, Rambling Woods Drive.
Okay. You say you arrived on site in 7 minutes, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You drew a diagram of the house, correct?
Correct.
It has several errors, doesn't it?
Yes.
As a police officer, it is your duty to protect the people of South Carolina, correct?
Correct.
As such, you are required to know the law and how to apply it, correct?
Correct.
You receive training on procedures to collect evidence and interview witnesses, correct?
Correct.
The Miranda rights are a key part in applying the law, correct?
Correct.
The key sentences in the Miranda rights are, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, correct?
Correct.
Is it a requirement to read it to every suspect that is arrested?
Yes.
Do you remember with 100% certainty reading the defendant her Miranda rights?
Not 100%, no.
Isn't it true you threatened to break down the bathroom door if the defendant did not come out?
It is true.
Couldn't this be viewed as a hostile act, especially after being abused for years?
It is quite possible.
Is it true you took the defendant to the dining room to be treated by a doctor?
I believe so.
Can you, at this time, Your Honor, I would like to enter Defense Exhibit Number 3 into evidence.
May you please see identification 3? Any objection from the state?
No objections, Your Honor.
Item 3 will be admitted as Exhibit 3.
Can you please steer the court where the path you would have to take to go from the bathroom to the dining room?
Yes, you would have to come out of the bathroom, into the living room, and enter the dining room.
In your experience, wouldn't a woman who has been abused for years be traumatized when a police officer threatened to break down the door, then brought her straight past her husband lying in a pool of blood?
Objection, Your Honor.
I will hear your objection.
Opinion.
Response?
Your Honor, a lay witness can give an opinion based solely upon their rational perception of the facts.
And how does this serve as a lay opinion witness?
It is in his experience.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
I will sustain the objection. That appears to be more of an expert witness than a lay opinion in this particular matter.
Isn't it true Mr. Barrett's belt wasn't on him?
It is true.
The belt was found on the living room floor, correct?
Correct.
You told Mrs. Barrett that she needed to give a statement, didn't you?
Yes.
Isn't it true Mrs. Barrett was still crying and upset during your questioning?
Yes.
Who did the defendant call?
She first called her attorney and then called her sister.
Mrs. Barrett signed the confession, still upset, before you allowed her a chance to call an attorney, correct?
Correct.
Isn't counsel supposed to be offered before signing a confession or statement?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused? Does the prosecution have any other witnesses?
We would like to call Dr. Joe R. May to the stand.
Do you affirm that the evidence that you shall give in the jury and for in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Dr. Joe R. May,
What is your profession?
pathologist.
Are you the pathologist who did the autopsy on Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Your Honor, may we please establish Dr. Joe R. May as an expert witness?
Any objection from the defense? Yes.
Can you please describe John Walker Barrett's body?
Yes, it is a middle-aged man weighing 184 pounds with a height of 6'1". There are 2 bullet wounds in his back, slightly to the right of the spine, one in the posterior of his cranium, one in the leg, and one in the arm.
What do you think the cause of death was?
A bullet wound to the cranium,
What was the angle of this bullet?
about 45 degrees.
In your opinion, what do you think this implies?
That the body was laying down face first.
Do you know what the distance the shots would have been fired at?
Not exactly.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any cross from the defense?
According to your autopsy, Mr. Barrett was wearing a white button-down shirt, a tie, blue-gray suit pants, black wingtip shoes, and black socks, correct?
Yes.
You didn't see a belt on Mr. Barrett, did you?
No.
Can you tell if Mr. Barrett was fleeing from Mrs. Barrett or if he simply slipped and fell?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Any response?
That was your only question. Is it possible that some of the shots were fired accidentally?
Potentially, yes.
Can you tell, is it possible to determine the order of the shots?
No.
On your drawing, you labeled the gunshot wounds, but you skip number 3 and go from 2 straight to 4, correct?
Yes.
You have told us that it is not possible to determine the order of the shots. Did skipping the number 3 have any reason behind it?
I do not recall.
Is this a mistake?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Any response?
Well, Your Honor, if Dr. Joe R. May did draw the diagram, then he would have personal knowledge of it.
Overruled. You may answer the question.
Is this a mistake?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused? Right. Does the state have any further witnesses?
Your Honor, I would like to call the reporter to the stand.
Do you affirm that the evidence that you shall give in the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Can you please state your name for the record? Reporter. What is your occupation?
I'm a housemaid
How long have you been a housemaid?
all of my life,
How long have you been working for the Barretts?
about 6 months.
What are your usual hours working for them?
I work from 2 p.m. to 10
Have you ever seen any cuts or bruises on Mrs. Barrett?
No.
Have you ever been in trouble with the law?
Yes.
Why?
I was accused of stealing $100 from my past employer's purse, but I never did it.
Had you seen anything unusual earlier in the day of the murder?
Yes.
What was that?
I heard the loud noises like a car backfiring, and then I saw Mrs. Barrett come into the house with a gun in her hand.
Do you know if Barbara gets upset when John comes home late?
She does.
What time did he come home the night of the murder?
9 p.m.
Can you tell me what happened from 9 o'clock until your shift was over?
John arrived home, and Mr. and Mrs. Barrett talked in the living room. They were arguing. I told them dinner was served, and they came to the dining room to eat, and they were still arguing. I heard Mrs. Barrett say something like, "You'll be sorry."
Oh, what happened after that?
I heard 3 loud noises like I'd heard earlier in the day, and I came to see what was going on. I saw Mr. Barrett limping back into the dining room from the living room, and Mr. Barrett limping, and Mrs. Barrett was coming behind him with a gun in her hand.
What did you do after you saw Mrs. Barrett come into the dining room with the gun?
I ran out of the house.
Can you tell me where you ran out of the house in the house diagram here?
No.
Do you know if Mr. Barrett was ever harsh or rude to his kids?
He was not.
Was he ever harsh or rude to you?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. Need cross-examination of defense?
You have worked for Barrett for 6 months. During this time, you stated that something was wrong, but you knew nothing about your feelings. Isn't this correct?
Yes.
You never talked with Mr. or Mrs. Barrett about your concerns, even though you're on them 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Isn't this true?
Correct.
You say that Mr. Barrett was nice to you. However, he would throw things at you when your cooking was not just liking, correct? Doesn't this indicate that Mr. Barrett has a difficult time controlling his temper?
Yes.
Mr. Barrett arrived home on more than one occasion drunk, correct?
Correct.
You see Mrs. Barrett cry and argue with Mr. Barrett prior to the events on December 18, 1988, correct?
Yes.
Didn't you hear Mrs. Barrett screaming upstairs in your bedroom during one of these arguments?
Yes.
Mr. and Mrs. Barrett own a large house. Since you only heard this once, it doesn't seem weird that she would be screaming so loudly that you could hear her downstairs.
Objection, Your Honor. Opinion.
I'll hear your objection, I'm sorry.
Opinion.
Any response?
I will withdraw the question. You testified that you never saw any wounds or bruises on Mrs. Barrett, correct?
Correct.
Is it true that you weren't looking for any bruises?
Yes.
Just because you never saw Mr. Barrett striking Mrs. Barrett, can you say with 100% certainty that he never hit her?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll hear your objection.
Lack of personal knowledge.
Your response?
Your Honor, a lay witness can give an opinion solely based on the rational perspective of the facts.
I'll allow it. Objection's overruled, you may answer.
Just because you never saw Mr. Barrett striking Mrs. Barrett, can you say with 100% certainty that he never hit her?
No.
Mr. Barrett began drinking scotch at dinner the night in question, correct?
No.
Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit 4 into evidence.
May I please see Exhibit 4?
Your Honor, I would not like to enter exhibit warrant evidence.
All right, please continue.
Is it true that the kitchen is past the breakfast room and there is a room separating the kitchen from the dining room?
Can you restate your question?
Isn't it true that there is a kitchen past the breakfast room and there is a room separating the kitchen from the dining room?
Yes.
You wouldn't have room limited the amount of conversation you could hear, and you only heard the parts that damaged Mrs. Barrett's reputation.
Yes.
Isn't it true, up to this point, Mr. and Mrs. Barrett had been arguing and seemed frustrated with each other?
This is correct.
Isn't it also true their argument continued and Mrs. Barrett was crying uncontrollably?
Objection, Your Honor, lack of personal knowledge.
I hear your response.
Your Honor, it is in the lead reporter's witness statement.
I will allow it. Objections overruled, you may answer.
Isn't it also true they argued continued and Mrs. Barrett was crying uncontrollably?
Yes.
Earlier in your testimony, you stated that Mrs. Barrett came into the house through a private door holding a gun, correct?
Correct.
Please indicate on Exhibit 3 where this door is located.
I cannot.
Is this the first time you see Mrs. Barrett with a gun?
Yes.
Before you started working for the Barretts, you have been put on probation for stealing, correct?
Correct.
You were found guilty of this charge by a court of law, correct?
Correct.
Did you plead guilty to this charge? Did you plead guilty to this charge?
I do not know.
Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit 4 into evidence.
Any objection from the state?
No objection, Your Honor.
Identification 4 will be admitted as Exhibit 4.
Could you please read the blue highlighted section?
50 is guilty.
Mrs. Barrett has stated she saw you take money from Mr. Barrett's drawer. Doesn't it make sense that we can believe that you were lying to us because of your past record?
Objection, Your Honor. Opinion.
Any response?
Your Honor, I will withdraw the question. On the night of John Walker's death, you ran out of the house after you saw Mrs. Barrett with the gun, correct?
Correct.
You left through the kitchen door, correct?
Yes.
Can you indicate on Exhibit 3 where that door is located?
No.
Why not? Why can you not indicate where the door is located on Exhibit 3?
I must have been shocked after seeing Mr. Barrett dead.
Did the person who drew this diagram not draw it accurately?
Objection, Your Honor.
Basis of objection?
Lack of personal knowledge.
Any response?
Your Honor, this witness left the kitchen door, and it should be on the diagram if he is in the house.
I'll overrule the objection, I'll allow it.
Did the person who drew this diagram not draw it accurately?
I have no knowledge of that.
Is the kitchen door on the diagram?
No,
Is there a kitchen door in Mrs. Barrett's house?
no,
You witnessed that Mr. Barrett was still alive before you left the house, correct?
correct?
Isn't it true because you left the house, you did not witness the final events that took Mr. Barrett's life?
Yes,
You decided after leaving the house because Mrs. Barrett had a gun to re-enter the house before the police had arrived to secure the crime scene, correct?
can you please restate your question?
You decided after leaving the house because Mrs. Barrett had a gun to re-enter the house before the police had arrived to secure the crime scene, correct?
Yes,
Doesn't it seem odd that you knowingly entered the house, decided to go locate Mrs. Barrett, who was previously maniacally waving a gun around before you left?
Objection, Your Honor.
Basis?
Opinion.
Any response?
Your Honor, a lay witness can give an opinion solely based upon the rational perception of the fact.
I believe your question asks for an opinion as opposed to observation of facts, so I'm going to sustain the objection.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. I have no further questions for you, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused? Any further witnesses from the state? Is the state resting?
Yes.
Is the defense prepared to call its first witness?
yes, Your Honor. I call being required to stand.
Do you affirm that the evidence that you shall give in the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Can you state your name and occupation for the court?
My name is Dana McGuire, and I'm a practicing psychologist.
Can you tell us more about your occupation and your clients?
I have an active private counseling practice where my clients are mostly abused and battered women.
For how long have you been at this practice?
Over 17 years.
What are your credentials?
I received my bachelor's degree from Campbell State University. I graduated with the highest honors. I have my master's degree in psychology, where my emphasis was on sociological and psychological dysfunction of human family structure.
What was your thesis?
My thesis was entitled Passive Behavior and Learned Helplessness in Interfamilial Relationships.
Your Honor, I'd like to request Amy McGuire be treated as an expert witness.
Any objection from the state?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right.
About how many women have you interviewed?
I have interviewed over 300 women and listened to over 500 fragments of stories.
How would you view the situation of battered women around the world?
It is a national crisis.
How do you classify a battered woman?
I classify a battered woman as anyone who is subject to forceful behavior by men against her will.
How do you classify a battered couple?
In order for a couple to be classified as a battered couple, the couple must go through 2 cycles which each consist of 3 phases.
What is the first phase?
The first phase is a tension build-up stage, and tension builds up between the couple that can argue a lot.
What is the second phase?
The second phase is the acute battering phase. The man unleashes an uncontrollable degree of tension, which results in a major psychological and physical harm.
What is the third phase?
The third phase is a very loving phase, much like the honeymoon of their marriage. And the woman views this as her man's true state of behavior. And the woman forgives the man, and the man feels like he will have no need to abuse the woman ever again.
When is the payoff for the couple?
It is in the third phase.
Why would a woman stay in this sort of relationship?
Women stay in these sort of relationships because of a theory of learned helplessness that was demonstrated by Dr. Samuel Michaels. The researchers put dogs in cages and delivered them random electrical shocks.
How did the dogs respond?
At first they tried to escape, but soon they became passive and even resisted being dragged out of the cage.
Has this experiment been repeated on other animals?
Yes, it has, with the same results.
When have you interviewed Barbara Barrett?
I have had the opportunity to interview Barbara Barrett multiple times for several hours each time.
What was Mrs. Barrett's situation before her husband's death?
It was a classic case of a battered woman.
How did the abuse she received compare among battered women?
It was extreme, yet not uncommon.
What saw Mrs. Barrett through each battered phase?
She saw her man as how he behaved in the third phase.
Could she have broken free from her husband?
No,
How did Mrs. Barrett view her husband leaving?
she saw as a betrayal for every effort to pacify and keep him in the marriage.
Could Mrs. Barrett have controlled her actions on that night?
No, she could not have controlled her actions as she could have controlled the rising of the sun.
From a psychological viewpoint, what happened on that night?
She saw the reality of her circumstances. She saw her husband as he was, a man capable of serious injury and even death.
How would you describe the end of their marriage?
It was a simple yet tragic end to a marriage.
Thank you, Daniel McGuire. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any cross from the state?
Yes or no? Is your research conducted in a controlled database?
No.
Does this mean you conduct your research yourself?
Yes.
Does this mean you could possibly misconduct a study?
Possibly, but unlikely.
How long has Mrs. Barrett been coming to your sessions?
Several times.
And do you know how long she has been abused?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
May this witness be excused? May be excused. Any further witnesses from the defense?
Your Honor, the defense would like to call Barbara Barrett to the witness stand.
You've heard enough evidence that you shall give in the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Ms. Barrett, before you begin, please advise you that you do not have to testify, that you are allowed to testify. Have you had an opportunity to discuss this with your counsel?
No, Your Honor, but I feel confident in testifying.
All right, please continue.
Please state your name and your relationship to John Walker Barrett.
My name is Barbara Allen Barrett, and I'm his wife.
Where and when did you meet your late husband?
I met him at an alumni function for Vassar in 1978.
What was your first impression of Mr. Barrett?
I was fascinated by his charms, his manners, and his intensity. He was the most charismatic man I've ever met.
What happened the night you met your late husband?
We talked for an hour or so, and then headed to the pool area for some fresh air. We both had had too much champagne at the time. John pushed me to the ground and started getting fresh with me. Somehow I managed to get up and leave without causing a scene.
What happened after that?
John made several calls apologizing for what he had done. He flooded my house with flowers, and I agreed to see him 2 days later.
Can you tell us about your dating relationship?
Yes. John was a perfect gentleman and a wonderful companion. He spent a lot of time with my 2 children, who absolutely adored him.
Was there anything going on with John that gave you a reason to be concerned?
Yes. He was working very hard and drinking quite heavily at night at his social events. When he was sober, he was the most kind and considerate man I've ever met. But when he drank, he'd become extremely moody and leave the house abruptly.
Do you know why he would leave abruptly?
I never knew what I did to provoke him.
What happened just 2 weeks before your wedding?
John came over to my house for dinner. I didn't know this at the time, but he had just lost an important case at trial. He's You could tell he had been drinking, and he had a wild look in his eyes. My chef had prepared a wonderful dinner, and we were about to eat, but John requested I make him issue this water instead. I fixed a weak drink on purpose, hoping to avert a scene. When I gave it to him, he tasted it. He threw it against the wall, and glass was everywhere. He started yelling that I was incompetent, stupid, and condescending. I tried to defend myself, but it just made him madder.
Did his anger become physical towards you?
Yes. With a great deal of force, he pushed me against the wall and slapped me in the face. He was crying, and so was I.
Were you surprised that he hurt you?
Yes. We were both very surprised that this had occurred.
Why did you continue with your plans to marry?
There was no real harm done, and I could see at that time how much John really needed me. As quickly as he had gotten mad, he became the loving and compassionate man I knew and adored.
Did he swear never to beat you again?
Yes. He swore that he would never touch me with violence again, and I believed him.
What were the early months of your marriage like?
Our lives were calm for several weeks. We spent most of our time together, and he made me feel like a very special woman.
Did you ever suspect your husband was having an affair?
Yes. 8 months into our marriage, John phoned, saying that he was going to be arriving home late. Around midnight, I was worried, so I put on my coat and drove down to his office. When I arrived, I could see the light was on. I opened the door and I saw John on the couch with a blonde. I didn't know who she was. I ran out as quickly as possible and returned home.
What was your husband's response?
About 2 hours later, he came home. He was furious.
Why was he mad at you?
He accused me of spying on him and humiliating him. He said that our real life, he wanted to spend time with other women.
Did he become physically violent?
Yes. His face was red and contorted, and I could see he intended to beat me again. I ran for the door, but he caught me and began hitting me with his fists in my face. When I was down, he began kicking me. The next thing I remember, I was in an ambulance and John had left.
How did you explain your injuries at the hospital?
I told everyone I had fallen down some stairs. I didn't want anyone to know what had happened.
What did John do after his abuse put you in the hospital?
He made several calls. He's called me every hour, and at night he read poetry to me. He flooded my room with flowers. He begged me to take him back, and he promised there'd be no more running in his life and no more beatings.
Did you accept his apology?
Yes. At that time, I couldn't have lived without it.
What happened after? How did you feel if you had to live without John?
I couldn't have lived without John. After this, he became the most wonderful husband.
Did John hold true to his promise not to beat you anymore?
No. The beatings seemed to run in cycles. He would usually beat me 3 to 4 times a year. Sometimes so severely I'd have to stay in the house for days. But usually afterwards, he would become the man I had married and I loved.
Why did you choose? Did you ever try to get professional help?
Yes. I spoke to my minister, who told me to be more submissive to my husband and forgive him. I then saw a series of doctors who prescribed tranquilizers to help me cope. I stayed in the relationship because John always told me how much he loved me and that he couldn't live without me.
Did you ever try to call the police after he beat you?
Yes. One time after lying unconscious, after hitting my head on the bathside, I called the police. There wasn't much they could do since John had already left. They did call back several hours later to see if I was still alive, though.
Did you ever discuss your marriage was in trouble?
Yes. 3 weeks before John's death, we discussed how our marriage was in difficulty. I decided to give up my fundraising activities for the symphony so we could try again.
About a week before his death, how would you describe John's behavior and physical condition?
He grew sloppy. Lee was constantly picking up after him. He grew edgy and tense. He was drinking a lot. He became verbally abusive.
What happened next?
I can't remember anything after that until the police came and took me away.
Was there anyone else home that night?
Yes, our housekeeper, Lee Porter.
Was there an incident involving Lee earlier in the day?
Yep, Yes, I caught Lee the day John died, taking money from his personal drawer. I wouldn't trust anything Lee Porter has to say about that day.
When you're taken into custody, were you read your Miranda rights?
No, I was never read my Miranda rights.
What happened after you gave your statement to the officer?
He told me I could call my lawyer, and I did.
What did your lawyer tell you?
She told me not to say anything until she arrived.
Did he sign a confession on December 18th, 1988?
Yes, but I didn't know I had the right to refuse. I was so terribly confused and upset, I agreed to do it. I couldn't think clearly. I just lost John.
Why does your witness statement have more detailed information?
2 weeks later, I was able to gather my thoughts more clearly. I would never have given this statement after that traumatic experience if I had known I didn't have to.
Thank you, Mrs. Barrett. I have no further questions for you, Your Honor.
Any cross?
How long have you been married to John Barrett?
I can't remember.
Your Honor, may we please enter Barbara's witness statement in never mind, sorry.
All right.
Was John abusive during your marriage?
Yes.
When was the first time John was abusive towards you?
On the day we first met, at the alumni function for Vassar in 1978.
And was he abusive to you after that?
Yes, but I loved him so much I decided to stay with him. He told me he couldn't live without me, and I felt the same way about him.
Did anyone witness these did anybody witness these beatings?
Few people ever knew about the beatings. Our housekeeper had no idea what was going on.
Did you ever tell anyone?
Few people knew.
Who did you tell?
I can't recall.
Your Honor, I would like to enter Barbara Barrett's witness statement.
May I please see that exhibit?
Yeah.
Any objection to admission, what would be exhibit number 5?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit number 5 will be admitted in evidence.
Did you tell anyone, such as a doctor or minister, about your problems?
Yes,
What was their response?
they told me to be more submissive to my husband and forgive him, and they prescribed tranquilizers to help me cope. And they asked me what I did to provoke such beatings.
Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit 4 into evidence.
We already have an exhibit 4. Which exhibit specifically are you?
The Tootsie letter.
I'm sorry?
The Tootsie letter?
May I please see that?
Yeah.
Any objection to the letter being admitted as exhibit 6?
Objection, Your Honor. This letter is irrelevant to the case because because there is no evidence that Mrs. Barrett ever read the letter.
Can you hear your response?
In Barbara's witness statement, I do believe she says she found the letter before.
I never say I found a letter.
I'll drop the question.
All right, on that basis, then, at this point, I will sustain the objection, and this is not yet admitted.
Do you have any children?
Yes, I have 2 children.
Are they from Mr. Barrett?
No, they are from a previous marriage.
What's the name of the person you previously married?
Michael John Reed. We were married for 6 years.
Currently, what are your children's last name?
Barrett.
So, John Barrett adopted them?
Yes.
Did John disclose to you that your marriage was in difficulty in the weeks before the night of December 18th?
Yes, we spoke about it together 3 weeks before his death.
Had John been drinking when he got home on the night of December 18th?
No. Surprisingly, he was sober. He usually drank, though.
In your witness statement, you said that John came out of the dining room with a belt, correct?
Yes.
However, in your confession, you said that he came out of the dining room and sat down and drank some scotch, correct?
I was so confused.
You said in your witness statement that you can't remember the officer giving you your Miranda warnings, correct?
He never read me my Miranda warnings.
Can you remember anything after dinner on the night of December 18th?
Yes. I remember John coming in with the belt, and then it's a blur until the police came and took me away.
No further question, Your Honor.
All right, may this witness be excused. Any further witnesses from the defense?
Your Honor, the defense correct.
All right, we will now hear closing arguments from the defense.
May it please the court, Your Honor, and ladies of the jury. Let me draw your attention to the defendant. Mrs. Barrett is being charged with murder, and that is what brings us here today. However, the facts of the case presented lead us to believe that my client, Mrs. Barrett, did not intend for her husband to die. The defense has shown evidence that proves Mrs. Barrett was remorseful, she acted in self-defense, and she was an abused woman. Mrs. Barrett is not, as the prosecution imagines, a cold-blooded murderer. Now it is your job as the jury to look at the evidence given, the testimonies shown, and decide a verdict. If there's anything that produces even the slightest doubt, the slightest thing that contradicts the prosecution's case, you must give the verdict of not guilty. The defense has shown evidence that produces reasonable doubt. First of all, Lee Porter claims she never saw anything that implied Mrs. Barrett was being beat by her husband. But she also said she wasn't looking. This means that if Mrs. Barrett had a black eye, Lee Porter probably wouldn't notice. Ms. Porter also says she saw Mrs. Barrett with a gun, but Mrs. Barrett was forced to find a way to protect herself from the increasingly severe beatings her husband gave her. Ms. Porter makes the claim that she left the house after seeing Mrs. Barrett with a gun, but went back in after only 10 minutes without the police, no longer afraid of said gun. This leads to the question, where was the police officer? The reporting officer, C.M. Cheney, claimed to have arrived at the address 7 minutes after getting the call, but this is impossible because, as I have stated, Porter went back in after 10 minutes without him. One of them must be lying. According to Mr. Cheney, Mrs. Barrett shouted, "I didn't mean to hurt him." This shows remorse, not premeditation, as the prosecution imagines. Mr. Cheney does not represent all the facts and evidence. He claims both legs of Mr. Barrett were shot, which we know is inaccurate. He also claims that there is no exit through the kitchen, but Ms. Porter states she ran through the kitchen door. Ms. Porter also mentions a private door, which is not visible on Mr. Cheney's house diagram. Another thing, the Miranda situation. If you will permit me, I'd like to introduce the Miranda v. Arizona statute, in which it states 4 things. 1. In custody interrogations must show a waiver for constitutional rights. 2. State has the burden to prove a suspect has intelligently waived the right against counsel and self-incrimination. 3. Silent record is impermissible. And 4. The officer must show the defendant was offered counsel but intensely and understandingly refused. As we know, Mrs. Barrett signed a confession, but she was not read her Miranda rights by the arresting officer Cheney, nor was she offered counsel. There is no evidence Barbara intelligently waived her rights. Therefore, we know she signed because she didn't know she could refuse. I would ask the court to throw out the defendant's confession due to these facts. Members of the jury, in light of this, we have to rely on our evidence and testimony. As we know, Mr. Barrett has a history of abusing his wife, and he did not have his belt on. This belt had been used only 5 days before to abuse Mrs. Barrett. It would be reasonable to assume that she saw a need to defend herself. According to the testimony of Dana McGuire, the psychologist, Mrs. Barrett could not control her actions due to the fact of being traumatized by her husband. Mrs. Barrett gave testimony to not being able to control her actions, which is likely a result of being traumatized from her husband's abuse and the police officer's threats. Mrs. Barrett tried to get professional help, but they just said it was her fault and to forgive her husband. This was not the help she needed, so she was forced to protect herself. Mrs. Barrett acted in a helpless, self-preservation manner, a learned behavior as a battered woman. However, she still loved her husband and did not want a divorce, even though it would solve all of her problems. Now, the prosecution will claim it was murder, but this is simplifying a complex situation. We already know Mrs. Barrett loved her husband. Why would she want to kill him? She was just an abused woman who was looking for help that no one offered. Mrs. Barrett would not have been able to control her actions, being beat and traumatized year after year, the abuse increasing in severity. We learned from the testimonies that Mr. Barrett had 2 different personalities, one where he was sober, where he would become charming and loving, the man Mrs. Barrett married. One when he was drunk, where he would become moody and violent. Mrs. Barrett still loved her husband, but was an abused and afraid woman, which made her self-preservation essential to her. Members of the jury, it is your job to look at all the facts presented, the testimonies given, and I implore you to see upon such that there should be no reason that Mrs. Barrett is guilty. The defense is showing you the truth, which like gold may appear dirty and mangled, but still the truth. The prosecution, on the other hand, is trying to show you a side of which, like fool's gold, may look good but isn't the real thing. Mrs. Barrett was a battered woman, and sadly there are many battered women in this world, but she's not that different from any of the others. On account of the facts that Mrs. Barrett did not act in a premeditated manner, she was distraught and she wouldn't have been able to control her actions due to her strong sense of self-preservation. I ask that you find Mrs. Barrett not guilty. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well, now for closing from the state.
For many long years, Miss Barrett has been battered and abused. However, just because she had an unfortunate marriage does not excuse the fact that she did indeed murder her husband. We, the prosecution, have presented you with 3 witnesses. The first, C.M. Cheney, told us about what he saw at the scene and how the gun that he identified is not normally used in self-defense, but rather to kill targets. Our second witness, Dr. Joe R. May, is a skilled pathologist who told us about the body and how Mr. John Barrett had been shot multiple times. If this was truly self-defense, then there would be no reason for Miss Barrett to continue to shoot John after he had already been weakened. Our third witness, Lee Porter, has told us about how she saw the gun in Miss Barrett's hand twice. Once during the murder, and earlier that week practicing with it. The defense may try to argue that some of our witness statements are irrelevant. However, the proof they offer for this is that Lee Porter is untrustworthy. They believe this because apparently she had a small incident with the law in her past, and the only other reason they offer this up is because in their desperation to get away from the murderer, she forgot which door she ran through. They may also say that Officer C.M. Cheney forgot to give Miss Barrett her witness and her rights. However, C.M. Cheney is a qualified police officer, and Miss Barrett has shown to have a tendency to forget things. So the fact that she would remember one very specific thing is a tad odd. Miss Barrett, as the defense attorneys have stated, was living in an abusive relationship and could not control her actions. They have said that multiple times, and it does appear that way. She could not control her actions as she decided to kill John Walker Barrett. Miss Barrett had the motive to kill John, she had the means to do it, and she had the opportunity. We implore the judge and the jury to find Miss Barrett guilty of her true crime, murder. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies of the jury, excuse me. This concludes the testimony and argument portion of our case. You may now discuss this matter among yourselves, and I will ask the bailiff to please lead you out of the courtroom to begin your deliberations.
All rise.
If the ladies of the jury please follow the bailiff out. All right, please be seated. This concludes this portion of the round. I will now retire to my chambers, deliberate, and we'll come back in about 15 to 20 minutes. And then from the prosecution. Is the state's attorney ready to present the opening argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please begin.
Your Honor, may I move freely about the courtroom?
Please.
May it please the court, Your Honor, and members of the jury, my name is Lane Funk, and this is my co-counsel, Adley Minista and Joey Knight. You have been called here today because of the shooting of an innocent man, John Walker Barrett. Mr. Barrett was a loving father and a hard worker. On the night of December 18, 1988, Mr. Barrett was shot 5 times in the sanctuary of his own house by his jealous and malevolent wife, Barbara Allen Barrett. The defense will try to manipulate you into believing that Mrs. Barrett was justified in killing her husband. The evidence will show that this was not the case. On the night of Mr. Barrett's death, at approximately 9 o'clock, Mr. Barrett arrived home from work, completely sober. He was greeted by his wife, who complained to him about his late arrival. They continued to argue, and Mr. Barrett told her he would like a divorce. Mrs. Barrett begged and pleaded with him to stay in this tumultuous and failing relationship. They left the living room and entered the dining room, where their housekeeper, Lee Porter, served them with dinner. Continuing to argue, Mr. Barrett requested Mrs. Barrett leave the room. Mrs. Barrett went into the living room and poured herself a glass of wine. Shortly after, Mr. Barrett followed her into the living room, where Mrs. Barrett shot him multiple times. The
The evidence will show that Mrs. Barrett was enraged with jealousy. She was not going to allow Mr. Barrett to leave her, so instead, she planned, practiced, and executed her deadly shots. If she couldn't have him, no. Our first witness, Lee Porter, a housekeeper, has worked for the Barretts for 6 months. Mr. Porter will testify to hearing a noise similar to a car backfiring earlier in the day, and then seeing Miss Barrett enter the house through a private door with a gun in her hand. Mr. Porter will testify to hearing the same noises right before witnessing Mr. Barrett, covered in blood, limped into the dining room. He will also testify that the Barretts argued and yelled at each other frequently. Our second witness, C.M. Cheney, is the officer who was dispatched to the shooting. C.M. Cheney is a skilled officer who has worked for the Milton County Police Department since 1982 and has a degree in criminal justice. Upon arrival, Officer Cheney found Mr. Barrett already dead, lying face down in a pool of blood. She will also testify to finding a letter, a blood-stained letter, in the dead man's clutch, and its ripped envelope addressed to Tootsie, Mr. Barrett's mistress. Our third witness, Dr. Joe R. May, a pathologist, will testify that Mr. Barrett was shot 5 times, 4 of which occurred while he was facing away from Mrs. Barrett. The wound to the head, the ultimate cause of death, is in a position that indicates Mrs. Barrett was standing over the victim as he was lying face down. This is only one of 3 shots she fired after he was already on the ground. Your Honor, members of the jury, as you can see, the only plausible outcome we can reach is that Mrs. Barrett, enraged with jealousy, murdered her husband on the night of December 18th, 1980. I ask you to charge the defendant guilty of murder.
Thank you. If you would now please turn your attention to defense counsel for the defendant's opening statement.
May it please the court, your honor, and ladies of the jury. My name is Paul Gelinas, and my co-counsels are Owen Ronigan and Samuel Welch. Barbara Allen Barrett was trapped in an abusive relationship, and when her abuser approached her with a weapon, she chose to defend her life. The issue in the court today is not, did Barbara kill John, Mr. Barrett? Sorry. But why? We believe that because of the evidence we have seen, it was in self-defense. Barbara had met John 10 years ago at a party where even then he had abused her, although to a much milder extent. A week before they married, John put Barbara in the hospital, after swearing he would never touch Barbara again with violence. After swearing to never touch Barbara again with violence, he put... Sorry, I'm getting kind of lost. After swearing he would never touch Barbara with violence again, they married. After that, there were several instances of violence, but then, on the unfortunate night, Mr. Barrett approached Barbara with a belt. The defense will call Barbara Allen Barrett to testify with her innocence. She proclaims in this case because she is the woman in question who was abused by Mr. Barrett. The defense will also call psychologist Dana McGuire to the stand to walk us through the hellish life of an abused woman. Although not in that order, sorry. According to state statute 16-350, manslaughter is the unlawful killing of another without malice or intent, either expressed or implied. Barbara has never expressed or implied ill will towards Mr. Barrett. Now you have heard our take on the case. The defense urges you, Your Honor, and the jury, to drop the charges of first-degree murder against our client.
Thank you. Precinct prepared to call its first witness?
Yes, John. We would like to call Lee Porter.
Do you affirm that the evidence you should give to the court and the jury in this trial should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Lee Porter.
How long have you been a housekeeper?
I have been a housekeeper my entire career.
What are your responsibilities, duties, and shifts?
My responsibilities are to clean and prepare meals, and my shift is 2 to 10 p.m. Wednesday through Sunday.
How long have you worked for the Barretts?
6 months.
Why are you here in court today?
I am here in court today because I am their housekeeper, and I was present during the death of Oliver Barrett.
Can you describe the Barrett relationship in the weeks preceding December 18th?
Something seemed off about the relationship. Mr. and Mrs. Barrett would argue, and Mrs. Barrett would cry. She was crying a lot during the last few weeks.
How would you describe Mr. and Mrs. Barrett's relationship?
Objection, Your Honor.
I hear the objection.
Lack of personal knowledge.
Any response?
Lay witnesses can give an opinion based on their rational perception of the facts.
Objection overruled. All allowed.
How would you describe Mr. and Mrs. Barrett's relationship?
It was loving but argumentative.
Did you ever see Mr. Barrett physically hurt the defendant?
I never did.
Did you ever see any bruises on the defendant?
No.
Can you explain the events on the night of December 18th?
Yes. Mr. Barrett came home around 9 p.m. Mrs. Barrett was pacing the hall, worried that he kept coming home later and later. Mr. Barrett then came in the door and set his briefcase down. We talked to Mr. and Mrs. Barrett. Mr. Barrett talked to Mrs. Barrett, and I went and told them that dinner was served.
How did they look when you told them dinner was ready?
They looked flustered as if they had been arguing.
What happened when you served dinner?
When I served dinner, I heard Mr. Barrett say, "I've had it with you, Barbara. Now you know. I am leaving tonight."
How did Mr. Barrett appear?
He appeared rather calm and asked Mrs. Barrett to leave. She left, and on the way out, I thought I heard her hear, "You'll be sorry."
What happened after you went back to the kitchen?
Once I went back to the kitchen, I heard three loud noises like a car backfiring. I went out into the kitchen to see what the commotion was and saw Mr. Barrett limping. He had a piece of paper in his hand, and his arm and leg was bloody.
How did Mr. Barrett appear?
He appeared terrified, and Mrs. Barrett came into the dining room with a gun in her hand.
What did you do then?
I ran out of the house and called the police.
Did you notice anything unusual leading up to the event of December 18th?
Objection, Your Honor.
I hear your objection.
Opinion.
Would you re-ask the question?
Did you notice anything unusual leading up to the events of December 18th?
Any response to the objection?
No, I withdraw the question. Had Mr. Barrett been drinking that evening?
He had not when he came home, but he started during dinner.
Did you observe any behavior in Mrs. Barrett that suggested anger towards her husband?
Objection, Your Honor. Opinion.
Any
I'm
response?
just asking whether it suggested any, not whether it did.
I'll allow it. Objection overruled.
Did you observe any behavior in Mrs. Barrett that suggested anger towards her husband?
Mr. and Mrs. Barrett argued more often, and Mrs. Barrett was angry that Mr. Barrett kept coming home later.
Have you ever seen Mr. Barrett lose his temper?
Yes. Once the fourth when he didn't think my dinner was cooked correctly, but he would call me back afterward and it would get resolved.
Why did you ran to the Barrett home after the shooting?
I ran back into the Barrett home to locate Mrs. Barrett.
Have you ever been in trouble with the law?
I was in trouble once, 10 years ago. One of my previous employers accused me of stealing $100 from her purse, but I never did it.
Aside from this incident, is this the only time you have been in trouble with the law?
Yes.
Is the person who said you will be sorry to John Walter Barrett present in this courtroom today?
Yes, Mrs. Barrett said it.
Do you believe, based on what you have seen, that the defendant was in any way afraid of her husband?
She did not seem afraid.
What happened on the morning of the shooting?
On the morning of the shooting, I heard loud noises like a car backfiring coming from outside. They were the same noises I heard during the night of the shooting. Mrs. Barrett then came the type of person never uses holding a gun.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any cross by the state, or excuse me, by the defense?
How long have you worked for the Barretts?
6 months?
Have you ever noticed any bruises or scars on Mrs. Barrett?
No.
You said in your witness statement you also you turn a blind eye to other people's business, correct?
Yes.
Did John ever get verbally or physically abusive?
He would occasionally throw forks and things.
What time did John arrive home on the night of December 18th?
9 p.m.
What did you do after you heard the first shot fired in the house?
I went to see what had happened. I never knew it was any shots at the time. It just sounded like a car backfiring.
What did you do after you saw Mr. Barrett limping into the dining room?
I waited and then I saw Mrs. Barrett come into the dining room and then I went out of the house
How'd you exit the house?
through the kitchen door.
Your Honor, I would like to enter the scene diagram into evidence.
May I please see the scene diagram? Any objection to the admission of identification one?
Your Honor, the witness has no knowledge of this exhibit.
I will hear your response to that.
The witness was indeed in the house on the night of December 18th and would know what the house looked like.
All right, I will overrule the objection. Identification one will be admitted as exhibit one.
May you please point out where you exited the house?
I object, Your Honor. This is irrelevant to the case.
Hear your response.
Your Honor, for this line of questioning, it does pertain to the case.
How does it pertain to the case?
As to the credibility of the witness,
How does the door that the witness exited
There-
pertain to his credibility?
there appears to be no door.
Any further?
That does not pertain to whether Barbara Barrett killed her husband, murdered her husband.
I will overrule the objection to the answer.
Please repeat the question.
May you please point out the door that you exited the kitchen?
There isn't a door in the diagram.
So how did you exit the kitchen?
The The diagram is wrong.
What are your hours that you work for the Barretts?
2 to 10 p.m.
And Mr. Barrett died during your shift, correct?
Correct.
Who would murder someone while there was a hired maid in the house?
Objection, Your Honor. This is asking for the witness's opinion.
Response?
Your Honor, I will drop the question. Have you ever been in trouble with the law before?
I was in trouble once 10 years ago, but I never did it.
Your Honor, no further questioning.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may be excused. Commander, 1 moment. State in the second witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to call CMT to the stand.
You affirm that the evidence you give to the court and the jury in this trial should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Please state your name and occupation.
My name is CMG, and I am a police officer.
How many years have you been on the police force?
7 years.
What are your qualifications for this job?
I have a degree in criminal justice from South Bend College in Hinesville, South Carolina. I have 9 hours towards an advanced degree in criminal justice, and I have been at many high schools in the homicide.
What are your regular hours as an officer?
From 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. Tuesday through Saturday.
Were you the officer dispatched to 2437 Rambley Woods Drive on December 18, 1988?
Yes.
How long did it take for you to get to the address?
7 minutes.
What was the crime?
The crime was a homicide.
How did you find the victim?
The victim was face down, lying in a pool of blood, facing north, about 2 feet. His head was about 2 feet from the dining room door.
Who identified the victim?
Before.
And who was the victim?
John Walker.
What evidence was located at the crime scene?
Well, there was multiple blood spots. There were 6 spent rounds of a gun. There was a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson gun, and there was an envelope clutched in the deceased hands, and then there was an envelope lying in the living room floor.
And was the envelope ripped open?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit Number 2 for the prosecution into evidence.
And please see Exhibit 2. Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Identification 2 will be admitted as Exhibit 2.
Please identify this for the court,
This was the letter found in the deceased hand.
and please read it for the court.
My dearest Toots, you will never know how much your love means to me. The first time I saw you in court, I knew I could not live without you. All these years being married to Barbara have been a living help for me. As you know, Barbara is really a fine person, but her possessiveness and drug habits have become a burden I can no longer bear. I've tried all these years to keep it from her friends, but I can try no longer. Please do not think that you have stolen me away from her. Our marriage has been dead for a long time, and I do not wish her ill. I just cannot live without you, my wonderful child. And to think that I could have spent the rest of my days in that unhappy marriage had I not met you. I realize that I'm older than you by many years, but for the years I have left, I wish to be your husband.
Perhaps you will think me foolish to say that we could soon have children, the one I so desperately wanted for so many years, but which Barbara would not have. We could be so happy together. Although this may sound overly sentimental, I have shown to you a side which few people ever see. I love you with my whole being, my darling, as I have never loved before. They say you will wait for me. I will tell Barbara soon, and will mail this as soon as our flight is down. All my love, John.
Had the envelope to the letter been ripped open?
Yes.
Where was the envelope in relation to the letter?
The envelope was on the living room floor, and the letter was in the dining room classroom of the 16th.
Your Honor, may the bailiff please pin the Exhibit 1 onto the easel?
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
No objection. Yes.
Using the diagram of the house, can you show us where you found the body and the trail of blood?
Well, the trail of blood starts in the living room by the couch number 2, and then it goes into the dining room until it comes to the body.
Can you tell us the exact location of the blood spot on sofa number 2?
It is on the cushion that is vertical to the floor.
Where did you find Mrs. Barrett?
Mrs. Barrett had locked herself in the downstairs bathroom.
What did you do next after you found Mrs. Barrett?
I told her to come out. She unlocked the door and collapsed. I took her to the dining room to be treated by a doctor.
What did you hear Mrs. Barrett say after she was revived?
She said I didn't mean to hurt him.
When you asked the witness if she was threatened by Mr. Barrett in any way, what was her response?
Her response was no.
Do you regularly read suspects their Miranda rights?
Yes.
Were any promises made to the defendant?
No.
Was the defendant ever forced or tricked?
No.
When was the defendant's statement taken?
Within a half an hour of her arrival at the police station.
Did the defendant ever resist or ask for the questioning to be discontinued?
No.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Last 5 minutes.
Where was your partner on the night of the murder?
He was ill.
Are you supposed to work alone?
No, but my partner was ill.
Do you remember if you gave Miss Barrett her rights before or after the confession?
I make a habit of reading rights, and I have no specific recollection.
What did you see when you entered the house?
Well, I saw Lee Porter, and then I also saw Mr. Barrett's body.
Was there any evidence of drinking?
Yes, there was a glass of scotch and a glass of wine.
Was there any evidence specifically that Miss Barrett could have been drunk?
Objection, Your Honor. This is asking for the witness's opinion.
Response?
I will stop that line of questioning. Where was Miss Barrett at the scene of the murder?
She had locked herself in the downstairs bathroom.
What was she doing?
She was screaming that she didn't mean to hurt him.
Was the door locked?
Yes.
Did you threaten her in any way?
I told her I would break down the door, but it was to get her medical help.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Does the state have, may this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the state have any other witnesses?
Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Joe Armay to stand.
You affirm with the evidence you should give to the court and the jury in this trial
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Joe Arme.
What are your qualifications? First, what is your occupation?
I'm a pathologist.
What are your qualifications to be a pathologist?
I received my degree as a medical doctor of pathology.
Your Honor, may I treat this witness as an expert?
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
You may.
Who did you examine?
I examined John Walker Barrett.
How many gunshot wounds were there?
There were 5 gunshot wounds.
Your Honor, I would like to enter exhibit number 3.
If you see exhibit number 3. Any objection to the admission of exhibit 3? No, Your Honor. It will be admitted as exhibit 3.
What were the locations of the wounds to the body?
There was 1 gunshot wound to the upper portion of the left arm from front to back through and through. There were 2 gunshot wounds to the back, slightly to the right of midline, from back to front at an approximate angle of 45 degrees from a horizontal plane. And there was a gunshot wound to the upper portion of the right leg through and through.
What does a 45-degree wound path tell you?
It tells me that the shot was fired while the deceased was lying face down.
What was the location of the last wound?
The location of the last gunshot wound is the posterior portion of the cranium.
Did the bullet go through the head?
No.
Were there any powder marks?
No.
Do you know why there weren't any powder marks?
If there were powder marks, then that means that the muzzle of the firearm was more than 2 feet away from the gunshot wound.
What was the cause of death for John Walker Barrett?
The gunshot wound to the posterior portion of the cranium was the cause of death.
Is it possible to determine the order in which the shots were fired?
No, it is not.
How many shots were fired while the deceased was facing away from the shooter?
There were 4 shots fired while the deceased was facing away from the shooter.
How many shots were fired while the deceased was presumed to be lying down?
There were 3 shots fired at an approximate angle of 45 degrees from a horizontal plane, which is consistent with the deceased lying face down.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. Yes, Your Honor.
In your autopsy, you stated that it is impossible to determine in which order the shots were fired. Is this true?
Yes.
Then how are they numbered?
I numbered them because it would tell me how many shots there were.
Is it true that John was a well-nourished, well-developed male?
Yes.
Would this mean it would be easy for him to overpower a smaller woman?
Possibly.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Will this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any further witnesses from the state?
No, Your Honor. Prosecution rests.
Is the defense prepared to call its witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. Defense would like to call Dana McGuire to the stand.
You affirm that the evidence you give to the court and the jury in this trial to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Yes.
Please state your name for the record.
Dana McGuire.
What is your occupation?
I'm a psychologist.
What is your area of expertise?
I specialize in abuse and battered women. Also, I I have written numerous periodicals on the lives of abused and battered women. Over the past 17 years, I've interviewed over 500 battered women, and of those 500, I have collected data from 300 of them.
How long have you been in this line of work?
17 years.
What are your credentials?
I have a BA from Campbell State University. I graduated with the highest honors in psychology. I also majored in and have a master's degree in psychology.
Your Honor, may we establish Dana McGuire as an expert witness?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
You may.
Thank you. Can you define an abused or battered woman?
Well, as a result of my studies, I define a battered woman as a woman who is subjected to any forceful, physical, or psychological trauma by a man against her will.
Do you believe Barbara Barrett is an abused or battered woman?
Yes.
What is a battering couple?
Well, to be defined as a battering couple, you must go through at least 2 cycles, which can be broken down into 3 phases. The first being the minor battering phase, the second being the acute battering phase, and the third the honeymoon phase.
What is a battering cycle?
Well, in all battering cycles, the more the man becomes angrier, the more he abuses the woman because of his inability to control his behavior until the couple reaches the acute battering phase.
What is an acute battering phase?
Acute battering phase can last up to several days, and this consists of the man releasing a large degree of tension on the woman, which can result in major physical or psychological trauma to the woman.
Do you believe the Bears were in an acute battering phase?
Well, it is impossible to say. However, it is likely that Mr. Bear was just using the divorce as an exit strategy and planned to abuse Barbara one last time.
Objection, Your Honor. This information is beyond the scope of the statement of facts.
Response?
I will drop the question, Your Honor.
The jury will disregard the last answer. The objection is sustained.
Is it possible that Mr. Barrett was going to abuse her badly?
Yes.
Would this drive someone who had been abused in the past to defend themselves?
Yes, it could.
Do you think that Mrs. Barrett could have controlled her actions that night?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
You're getting paid $150 per hour for appearing in court, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. This question is irrelevant to the case.
Response?
It shows that you may be motivated to lie for Mrs. Barrett.
Overrule the objection. You may answer the question.
Yes, I am.
You're getting paid $75 per hour for counseling, correct?
Yes.
You did not meet with Mrs. Barrett before her husband died, correct?
No, I did meet with her about 2 weeks before he died.
The experiment you talked about supporting learned helplessness was on dogs, correct?
Yes. And also, it was performed on many other animals and showed the same results.
Scientists sometimes extrapolate information from studies with animals other than humans and apply that information to humans, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Scientists are occasionally wrong when they do this, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Pending.
Response?
David McGuire is an expert witness.
Agreed.
Can you restate the question, please?
Scientists are occasionally wrong when they do this, correct?
It's very rare that they are.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. McGuire. I have no further questions.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any other witnesses from the defense?
Let's call Ms. Barrett to the stand.
Do you affirm that the evidence which is put before the jury in this trial should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Ms. Barrett, before we begin, I am required to inform you that you are not required to testify, and you have a constitutional right not to testify if you so choose. Given that information, do you still wish to testify today?
Yes.
Please begin.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Barbara Allen Barrett.
What was your relationship with Mr. Barrett?
I am his wife.
How did you first meet your spouse?
I met John. I was 11 and I come to Florida.
Can you describe for me the beginning of your relationship?
When I first saw John, I knew we had to be together, and I was...
Objection, Your Honor. This information is beyond the scope of the statement of facts.
Response?
Miss Barrett what was John's husband. She should know how the relationship began.
Overruled. She may answer.
When I first met John, I knew we had to be together.
Miss Barrett, what did John do for a living?
John was a lawyer.
Did he make enough money for you to live comfortably?
My grandfather left us with plenty of money, but John always seemed to have a reason to work.
Could you please describe your marriage for us?
It started out okay, and it was amazing, but I noticed John was coming home later and later each night. He would come home stressed or angry, and I knew his work was causing all these emotions, so I tried to be there for him and help him.
Did you ever have any problems in your relationship with John?
I suppose he did, and I thought everyone had problems, so I thought it was normal. But like I said, he was coming home later and later. He would be angry and drunk. And one time he asked me to fix him a drink. And I fixed him a weak one, hoping it would calm him down. But he noticed and he threw it against the wall, and he proceeded to slap me and punch me.
Did his behavior change after that?
He would ask for forgiveness and beg me to stay with him, and he would promise to never harm me again.
Did he keep this promise?
No.
Did another one of these problems ever happen again?
Yes.
Can you describe these incidents?
I don't remember most of them, but I do remember ending up in the hospital a few times.
So you've received some major injuries from the incidents?
Yes.
Would you mind describing?
One time, John called and he said he was going to be home late, and it was 12 a.m. and I was getting worried. So I drove to his work, and I saw the light was on in his office, and inside he was on the couch with another woman. I did not recognize her, so I rushed home as fast as I could. And when John got home, he accused me of spying, and he was yelling at me and saying I was not his wife, and he was beating me.
Was John ever drunk?
Most nights he was.
Did you ever seek help?
At first I did not. Then I went to see my minister, who told me to forgive John. And then I went to see a series of doctors who prescribed me tranquilizers.
I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Barrett, but could you please describe what happened the night that Mr. Barrett was killed?
Yes. We came home at 9, and we talked in the living room. And then our housekeeping reporter told us dinner was served. So we went to the dining room to eat it, and he told me he wanted a divorce. I knew I couldn't live without him, and I asked him to think about it overnight. And I told him that I loved him, and that's all I remember.
Were there any witnesses to what happened that night?
Our housekeeper reporter was there.
What are Lee Porter's normal hours of work?
Objection, Your Honor. The witness does not know this. This was in Lee Porter's statement.
Response?
Lee Porter is her housemaid. It would be likely that she would know what her normal hours of work are.
I will overrule the objection. She can answer if she knows the answer.
Lee Porter
had you changed the horse schedule that day?
No.
And the murder happened at 9:50, correct?
Correct.
Objection, Your Honor, lack of personal knowledge.
Response?
I will withdraw the question. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes. Just a moment, Your Honor. I will proceed. After you were married, your husband returned to work, didn't he?
Yes.
It wasn't necessary for him to return to work, was it?
No.
He didn't need to return to work because you had a large independent source of revenue from your father, correct?
Yes.
Then you had financial means to leave the relationship, correct?
Yes, I did.
Is it correct that your husband was a defense criminal attorney?
Objection, Your Honor. I fail to see the relevance of this question.
Your Honor, you will see that Mrs. Barrett did know what a Miranda warning was.
I'll overrule the objection for now.
Mr. Barrett discussed at least a case he had worked on with you, correct?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. She never says anything about her husband discussing with her in her written statement.
May I please enter exhibit number 4, I believe?
Let's deal with the objection first. What's your response to the objection itself? You may make an offer of proof if you would like.
In her witness statement, it does say that that Mr. Barrett did discuss at least a case.
I will drop the objection, Your Honor.
You may answer the question. Objection is overruled.
Yes, you did.
You have full recollection from the time the police took you away, correct? You signed a document that clearly states that you were read your Miranda rights at the police station, correct? At this time, Your Honor, I would like to enter exhibit number 4 into evidence.
May I please see exhibit number 4?
Yes.
Any objection to the admission of exhibit number 4?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit number 4 will be admitted.
Please identify this for the court.
So, my confession.
Can you please read the first paragraph? It's highlighted in yellow.
I, Barbara Allen Barrett, have been warned by C.M. Cheney, the person whom this statement is made, that 1. I have the right to have a lawyer present to advise me both prior and during any questions. 2. If unable to employ a lawyer, I have the right to have a lawyer appointed to counsel with me both prior and during any questioning. 3. I have the right to remain silent and not make any statement at all. And any statement I make may probably be used in evidence against me at my trial. And 4. I have the right to terminate an interview at any time I desire.
Thank you. Your Honor, may the bailiff please take the larger exhibit number 4 onto the easel.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Yes.
That is the wrong one. It is the confession with officer's warrant. At the bottom, is that your signature?
Yes.
And it is authentic in all respects, correct?
Yes.
You stated in your witness statement that you didn't know why Mr. Barrett wanted a divorce, true?
True.
But in your confession, you said he told you he wanted a divorce and that he wanted to marry someone else. Is that correct?
Yes.
You didn't mention anything about Mr. Barrett entering into the living room with a belt in his hands in your confession, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Any further witnesses from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
I will now hear closing statements from the defense. You may be excused.
Imagine your sister, your daughter, your wife, your mother being brutally and physically harmed by a man much bigger than herself with no escape from his life. Barbara Allen Barrett had her whole marriage been abused by John Walker Barrett and had no escape from this marriage, either mentally nor physically. She had been abused by him several times, some of them sending her to the hospital. Finally, on the night of December 18th, Barbara found out that John was leaving her. Barbara, heartbroken, left the dining room after she was informed of this. John then followed her out with a belt, a weapon, to beat her and could even cause fatal damage. Barbara, seeing that John was a dangerous man who could even put her life in jeopardy, protected herself for the first time. The prosecution has brought up several witnesses to prove that Barbara Barrett committed first-degree murder. They brought up C.M. Chaney, police officer, who they say is a credible witness and knows that this is murder. However, C.M. Chaney cannot even remember reading Barbara her Miranda warnings, and nothing he says should be trusted, since he cannot remember such a simple aspect of this case. They also brought up Jo Armé, a pathologist. Jo Armé, however, herself stated that John was a strong and physically imposing man who could have easily caused a much smaller woman pain. We, the defense, have brought up two witnesses. The first, Barbara Allen Barrett, who had been abused by John her whole life. Barbara Barrett told us how John had abused her several times and had even lied to doctors, saying that she fell downstairs. Had even lied to doctors. Barbara herself even says that the second witness we brought up was the psychologist Dana McGuire. Dana McGuire informed us that Barbara had definitely been in an abusive relationship with her husband and had no escape, either physically or mentally. The prosecution also brought up the witness Lee Porter. Lee Porter has proven time and time again to be an untrustworthy person, having referred to a door that doesn't even exist and saying herself that she turns a blind eye to other people's afflictions. She said that she never noticed any bruises on Mrs. Barrett, even though Mrs. Barrett had been abused for over 10 years. Lee Porter says that on the day of December 18th, she even witnessed Barbara shooting, or she even witnessed what sounded like a gun firing before the day of the murder. However, she did say that it sounded like a car backfiring, and since she turns a blind eye, it could very well have been a car backfiring. Finally, we have the fact that Lee Porter was indeed hired by Mrs. Barbara Barrett to work from the hours of 2 till 10 p.m. John Barrett's death happened while Lee Porter was still working, who, after planning for several weeks to murder their husband, would make the trivial mistake, of having a witness that they themselves hired witness them murder their own husband. This is clearly a case of self-defense, a case of a woman who in self-defense, after years of being subjected to evil treatment, protected herself for the first time. We, the defense, plead that the court should not find Barbara Allenberg guilty of a crime that she did not commit, that Barbara Allenberg guilty of a horrible crime that she could not neither mentally nor physically commit. Thank you.
Thank you. Now please turn your attention to the attorney for the state.
May it please the court. Your Honor, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good afternoon. My name is Hadley Minister, and I'm co-counsel for the state of South Carolina. On December 18, 1988, Mr. John Walker Baird was killed. Mrs. Baird was bitterly tempted, planned, practiced, and then murdered her husband. We are assembled today to ensure justice is served on his behalf. At the beginning of this case, my co-counsel, Ms. Funk, told you that we, prosecution, would present 3 witnesses that will give testimony used as evidence to settle the fact of the alleged crime of the defendant's guilt. Let me summarize. You'll be sorry. This is what Mr. Porter, the defendant, uttered just before he shot her husband. Mr. Porter told you about the tumultuous Bear relationship. He gave testimony that Mrs. Barrett planned the murder of her husband by practicing as he got earlier that day. Importantly, Mr. Porter also told you he never saw any bruises on Mrs. Barrett. Officer Cheney discovered the victim lying face down, covered in blood, and tagged the weapon, a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber. Dr. May traced the victim was struck 5 times, with a bullet wound to the back of the head as the cause of death. The 3 witnesses for the prosecution are credited. Whatever inconsistencies or misdeeds the witnesses for the prosecution committed, they are minor and do not constitute reasonable doubt. Mr. Porter did plead guilty to petty larceny. This is the only blemish on his record, and he did state under oath that he did not do it. Officer Cheney may have made 1 or 2 clerical errors in documentation, but her work is otherwise consistent. Perhaps Dr. May's drawings were labeled, but that does not affect overall testimony. That bullet wound to the back of the head was the cause of death. 3 witnesses for the prosecution have no motive to lie, and their stories corroborate. In contrast, the witnesses for the defense lack credibility. Dana McGuire has done some very interesting research. However, the facts remain that she is getting paid to be here today, and that scientific studies involving animals are sometimes wrong. Mrs. Bear is a pitiful woman who has suffered in many ways. However, that does not change the fact that she has plenty of financial resources. Furthermore, we have no evidence that Mrs. Bear didn't conveniently change her story to fit in the Ms. McGuire's pattern of learning helplessness. Mrs. Bear is motivated to lie. She does not want to pay the consequences for her actions. The witnesses for the defense have motive to lie and lack credibility. The defense would like you to believe that Mrs. Bear is either acting out of self-defense or some kind of blameless spirit constituting manslaughter. Neither one of these theories is correct. This was not self-defense. In order for there to be self-defense, there needs to be physical provocation. Verbal provocation does not constitute self-defense. Mr. Bear, who was in a clear state of mind on the evening in question, did not physically provoke Mrs. Bear with his belt or otherwise. It is within normal accepted practice for a person to remove his or her belt at the end of a long day after a meal. Furthermore, we have no evidence that Mr. Bear ever physically hurt Mrs. Bear. There are no police reports or witnesses, other than the defendants, that gave testimony that Mr. Bear ever laid a hurtful hand on Mrs. Bear. Finally, Mrs. Bear shot Mr. Bear in the back of the head when he was face down. He was clearly not physically provoking him if he was face down, covered in blood. This was not manslaughter. In order for there to be manslaughter, State v. Corner states that voluntary manslaughter is an unlawful killing of a human being in sudden heat of passion upon sufficient legal provocation. Heat of passion alone will not suffice to reduce murder to involuntary manslaughter. There is no evidence of serious provocation sufficient to excite such a passion on the night of December 18th. We ask you to reject the defense's theory of defense. I submit to you, the jury, that Mrs. Bear murdered her husband. Murder is defined by South Carolina State Code 16.3.10
as the killing of another person with malice aforethought, either expressed or implied. State v. Johnson states that malice is the wrongful intent to injure another, and it indicates a wicked or depraved spirit intent on doing wrong. It is fairly customary for married couples to share a cocktail after a long day at the office. And it is, fortunately, pretty common for couples to be bickering at the end of a long day. What is not customary, however, is the fact that there was a gun readily accessible during this evening cocktail. Perhaps the gun was in the living room, or even on Mrs. Barrett herself. Furthermore, Mr. Porter saw Mrs. Barrett with the gun earlier on the day in question. I submit to you she had to have thought about this in advance. She had to have had the gun ready. Mrs. Barrett, who was bitterly jealous, planned, practiced, and then executed the murder of her husband. It is the only reasonable conclusion I want to make. Let's say when I go to bed at night, there's no snow on the ground. The next morning, I wake up, there is snow on the ground. I didn't see it snow. I do not have any direct evidence that it snowed. However, it's the only logical conclusion I want to make. Sadly, the once loving relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Barrett degenerated. Mrs. Barrett was unhappy with her circumstances and took matters in her own hands. Mr. Barrett came home late, they argued over dinner, and Mr. Barrett told Mrs. Barrett he wanted a divorce. Mrs. Barrett became upset, and she shot him. Not once, not twice, but 5 times. She shot him when he was helpless, face down on the ground, delivering a final, fatal blow to the back of his head. She had the gun ready, practiced earlier that day, and she used it to kill her husband. Mrs. Bear is a sad woman. I'm sorry that the man she once trusted to care for tenderly is impaired and betrayed her. While we need to extend our sympathy to Mrs. Bear and hope that one day she will find peace, today, in this courthouse, on behalf of the law-abiding citizens of South Carolina, our job is to deliver justice. We, prosecution, have met the burden of proof and shown beyond any reasonable doubt that Mrs. Barrett maliciously planned to kill her husband. We ask you, the jury, to find the defendant guilty of murder. Thank you for your time.
All right, that concludes this portion of the trial. I will now ask the bailiff to escort the jury out so that they may complete each of the duties they have back in their deliberation.
All rise.
All right, thank you all very much. Please be seated. Welcome to round 2.
Okay, Olympia and Urian teams, can you guys look around and make sure that your whole team is here? Why don't we have both of our teams kind of sit up closer? I know we've got one Olympia team here. Where's our Urian team? You guys sit closer. Come on.
Yeah, we're up in front.
You guys are front and center up here.
You guys are the ones that did all the work.
We'll give them this. So we just wanted to say thank you so much for finishing our final tabulations. And we're going to let Judge Nelson talk to us for a few minutes about his perspective of how things went and some comments. And then he will take any questions from you. And he has, when we're done with that, we'll have the jurors give you a few comments that they had, and then we'll announce the scores. So we'll go from there. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, first of all, you guys did just a great job. I can tell that you all put in a lot of work, and I really appreciate that. I wanted to be a lawyer from a young age, and so it's great to see people your age looking into this. And I can tell some of you really, really enjoyed this, and some of you were here because it was a project, and really wanted that going into it. And that's okay, because I think no matter what you come into something like this, you're going to learn something from it, and it gives you a really good idea of just how the process works. And you're going to interact with this process at some level throughout your lives. Whether you know somebody who maybe is charged as a criminal defendant, or you have friends who are attorneys or judges, or you're called for jury duty. Just having this background, understanding the system is really important. I don't know what all you guys covered in your term this last time, but I was told it's kind of like a civics overview. Did you guys read through the Constitution or anything like that? No, nothing like that? Okay. I would really encourage you guys to do that. It'll put a lot of what was happening in here, a lot of the rulings that I made on objections, it'll put them into some perspective. It's actually a little bit disturbing to me how few people look into anything related to the legal system. When I was in law school, I was going through a constitutional law class. Before that class, I was one of, I think, 4 people who had ever read the Constitution. And those are people who already have an undergraduate degree, have been accepted to law school, and are in their first or second year of law school. So I encourage you not to be those people. You guys are well on your way to making really, really good strides in that already. So, like I said, just starting out, great job, everybody. I went through and I tried to kind of take notes for each of your participation. And I have your names written here. I apologize, I don't actually know which faces go with names. So when I call out your names, you kind of raise your hand so I can kind of go through a few things with you. From the Berian team, is it Bella? Perfect. Great job on the opening in round 1. I really appreciated how you talked slowly. That's a really difficult thing for people to learn. It took me a couple of years of being in a courtroom and having a court reporter who actually writes things down, yelling at me saying, talk more slowly. You know your case incredibly well. You've read through it many, many times. But for the people who are sitting here, we may have only heard it either 0 to 1 or 2 times. I had only seen this material last night. It was the first time that I'd seen any of it. So I really appreciated when you started out that opening, just talking real slowly and laying out the case. You did a great job with that. You did a great job getting the defendant's statements when you were asking questions. I really appreciate just the way you've walked through that whole process. So great job. Paul, great opening on round 2. One thing to keep in mind is this is an adversarial process. All right, you apologized several times during your opening. You don't need to apologize. We're all people. Anybody who's ever been forward of a bar like this has lost their words at the very worst possible time. Take a minute, collect your thoughts, and jump right back in. All right? It's somewhat difficult when there's a whole group of people staring at you. You have someone up there who's judging you, what's going on, literally sitting there judging you. That's one thing. You apologize for making a mistake. Just remember, everybody does that. And this is true for everybody. I'm kind of trying to bring out specific things, but these are good things, whether you're in the practice of law, you're giving a speech somewhere else. Great things to remember. But you did a really, really good job. You recovered really well. I was getting a little bit nervous for you there, and then you recovered great. And that's what I was looking to see. Your cross of the pathologist was masterful. It was short, but that's what was necessary there. It wasn't going to help you to get a whole lot more out of that. It was an adverse witness. It was not going to help you. You asked the right questions. That's what you needed to do. Sometimes, as an attorney, you don't want to ask any questions because the witness is either so bad for you or the other side has done such a terrible job questioning them that you don't want more to come out. And so I thought that was a great job. Owen. I really appreciated all of your objections. Those were great. Whether I overruled them or sustained them, that doesn't really matter. Objections serve 2 things. Well, really 3. The first thing is it keeps out evidence that shouldn't come in, and you worked really hard to do that. The second thing is it keeps the other team on their toes. And thirdly, it disrupts the other team. That's really what they're for. You want to, if the other team is going through and they're doing great, and you can't really find something to object about hearsay. Even if there's no hearsay there, you can do that. That's part of the role. And I really appreciated how you jumped in there with those objections. Great job questioning the pathologist. And it's really important when you went through, you qualified the pathologist really well, but remember to get in more of those expert opinions. That's the whole point of qualifying an expert. Because normally, as we saw, the lay witnesses can't give opinions, but an expert absolutely can. But you did a great job of that. Sam. Let's see, great closing. I really enjoyed that. And great job not using your notes while you were doing that. You know your case really well. Like I said, you know it better probably than any of the jurors did, and I can guarantee you, you know it better than I did. So you don't need notes, because you already know it. And it looks a lot better when you're talking and not have to use those notes. And feel free to move around. You were struggling with the microphone a little bit. When you were the one speaking in a courtroom, you own the courtroom. You can go anywhere you want. You can move microphones around. Other than that, I thought you did a really, really good job. During your closing, you used some of the state's evidence against them. And I like that. As I said at the beginning, evidence goes both directions. No matter who introduces it, you did a great job using that. Joseph, good work as the bailiff. You helped keep the trial running. You didn't have any of the major roles, so I don't have a lot of comments for you, but I really appreciate it. You did a good job moving the exhibits around. It can be complicated, and I just appreciate that you kept it moving smoothly. Let's see, on the Olympia team, Laney, you did a great job. I really appreciated all of your objections, especially during the second round. You did a great job with that. At least 5 or 6 times, I saw you put your hands down like you're going to stand up, and then you stopped. And I was just waiting for that objection. You did a great job with all of them, but throw them out there, right? This is adversarial. You want to throw the other team off. You want to interrupt them. This sounds terrible. Talking to, my understanding is this is an all-Christian group. You're trying to be really calm and collected. That's good, all right? I'm a Christian. It's an adversarial process. It's the way the process works. You did a great job, but don't doubt yourself. Jump up, make the objection. If it's overruled, move on. Make another objection. If you're doing your job right as an attorney, the other side is going to get really annoyed with all the objections you're making. That's how you do your job right. You were definitely getting there, and I really appreciated them. Your opening was just fantastic. You really commanded the courtroom. You were moving around. You were walking back and forth in front of the jury. You were talking to the jury. That was great. I really appreciated that. The only real criticism that I had was one of your objections, actually. While the defendant was testifying, and the other side asked, what time did he die? And you said, I object based on the lack of personal knowledge. You were the prosecutor. You were saying that she had just killed this person, and then you objected saying she didn't know when it happened. And so you want to be careful with that. That's the only place where you want to be a little bit careful about making an objection, that you're not making an objection that's actually contrary to your case. But you did a great job. Great work. Joey. Let's see here. Again, great job qualifying the expert. You did that really well also. One thing that I would say is, because you're the expert witness, you had him sitting there, have him stand up, actually point at the exhibits. Your witness doesn't have to just sit somewhere. I don't know what you guys have covered as far as what courtroom decorum should look like, but ask your witness to get up. They can get up, move around, throw their arms if they need to, because sometimes that's what's going on. What did Lee Porter see? Was she walking very calmly? Was she flailing? Have him get up and demonstrate. That was the only thing that I thought you could have done a little bit better. Otherwise, it was great. You got in opinion testimony from your expert. Again, that's why the expert's there. Hadley. Let's see. I love the first 30 seconds of your closing, and then it just kept getting better. I thought you did a really, really good job. The first 30 seconds were really, really powerful because you outlined the whole case, and it brought everything to mind, which was great for the prosecution then. And so that worked out really, really well. You just kept going. Great use of the analogy. You also did a really good job defending against objections. Particularly in the first round, you all struggled a little bit, and there was an objection, you withdraw a question. Don't withdraw the question. You ask the question for a reason. Again, this is adversarial. You have to assume the person making the objection doesn't know what they're doing. You are asking the question because it's important information, and you want that question in there. And the judge has to make a decision. Don't withdraw. Don't back down. The judge will either rule for you or against you, but either way, make sure that your argument's heard.
So,
yeah, please, absolutely.
If you don't have a reason against the objection, so you just say, I don't have a reason against it, and let the judge decide, or?
So you should always have a reason to counter their objection, because you have a reason for the question. So if the question is, what did this witness say? And they say, objection, hearsay, then you want to think about some exception. And if you can't, you can say, well, Your Honor, this, even if it is hearsay, we think it's incredibly important to this case and it should be in. I can't think of the legal basis right now, but I'm pretty sure there's an exception. All right? Because it's really important information for the jury to learn. So come up with what you can on the spot. Most of being a lawyer, and so sometimes if you didn't mean to ask the question, I've had this happen to me before, I asked one question too many, the other side objected, and that gave me 2 seconds to realize, hey, I probably shouldn't have asked that question. Then you can withdraw the question. But otherwise, fight through and see what happens. Sometimes you'll win. Several times when there were objections and questions were withdrawn, I would have overruled the objections because the question was perfectly proper to come in. All right? So just keep that in mind. Let's see. I apologize. Now I lost my place in my notes, which I just told you guys not to do. Bryce. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Yeah, in round 1, great job getting in all of the history of the defendant's abuse, especially about the affair back from years ago. That would have been objectionable and probably wouldn't have come in, but something to keep in mind is all evidence is admissible unless it's objected to. And you got that in, and it just showed, man, this guy probably shouldn't have died, but he wasn't a great guy, and you're able to bring that in. Much of what happens in a courtroom isn't about the law, it's not about the facts, it's about how the decision makers feel about the parties. And so you did a really good job. You really made the defendant look like the victim when you were doing that, and that's good. That's what you were trying to do. I thought you did a great job of that. The only criticism that I had at all was you ended with a discussion about Miranda after she had testified. That's something that should come in really early on in her testimony. You want to end with the most powerful thing. And again, this is true whether you're in a courtroom or somewhere else. You don't want to end with technical details. You want to end with, I was in the hospital, I've been beat up, and I thought he was going to kill me this time. That's where you want to end. You don't want to end with what the officer and her were talking about later on. But otherwise, you did a great job. Is it Georgie? Great job with establishing the expert testimony. You did a great job with that, establishing that she was an expert. Your direct of the psychologist was incredibly clear. I really appreciated kind of walking through. That was complicated testimony. There were several pages of information, and you guys just walked through that really, really well. And you got in the all-important opinion testimony, so that was great. And Audrey, your cross of the doctor was great. I thought it all flowed really, really well. It was clear. It was short, but again, that could be a really good thing. It wasn't going to help you to bring in a whole lot more evidence, and so you did a really good job with that. It was clear that you knew what you were talking about, you knew what information you wanted, and I thought you did a great job. Right. And as far as the acting, by the way, that was fantastic. You guys all knew this story so well. It was clear that you became those characters, so I really appreciated that. Yes?
Just ask one question. We had one character that you missed in your in our Burian group. We had a Sarah at the end too.
I apologize.
Did you skip over her, or do you have some feedback for her?
I do, but I have, let's see. Yes, I have it all. I accidentally
She was our
tore a few
Barbara
pages
Barrett
out.
lead porter.
I apologize?
She was our lead porter and our Barbara Barrett.
Yes. So I apologize, I did not bring my notes out for yours. I did notice you did a really good job. I apologize, I have to get my other notes, because I did take notes on yours. My apologies. You guys did a great job. Do you have any questions? No? All right. A couple of things that I just have for the whole group, and I do apologize about missing you. It was not intentional. Several times, as the defense on both sides, you guys were using the word murder. As the defense side, this is not a murder. This is an unfortunate killing of a really bad guy. Okay? You don't want to say, at the time of the murder, what happened? Because you are projecting that you believe and you agree that your client murdered someone and we're just here as a formality. So just something to keep in mind. Your words really, really matter. And so whether you're trying to articulate that, people are listening for the word choice that you use. So just keep that in mind. I think we pretty much covered the rest of the other notes that I had here. Again, fight for those objections and just try to avoid using notes as much as possible, and I made a note on that. So, any other questions anybody has, whether from the teams or anybody else? Yes?
Can I just address them real quick?
Nope.
If there's any other questions, let's get questions for Judge first. Is there any other questions for anybody?
All right, thanks you guys so much. I really enjoyed it. This was a lot of fun.
Sit down, Judge Nelson, we have a gift we'd like to present.
Oh. I'm sorry, did you guys sit down?
No, I said before you sit
Before I
down,
sit
we have a
down,
gift we'd
okay.
like to present.
I just wanted, on behalf, Judge Nelson, on behalf of the students, the parents, all of our friends and families, we just wanted to say thank you. As everyone probably knows,
Thank you so much.
Mr. Nelson stepped in for us late last night. I got a text, it was about 9 o'clock last night, saying from Judge Samerson, I have this great guy who's going to fill in for me today, or for me tomorrow, and I just want to thank you so much for rising to the occasion, for coming and helping. These kids have worked for months preparing for this, and it really means a lot to us that you're able to be the judge for us today, and to make this feel really authentic and the valuable feedback that you gave the students. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
We're going to let you just hang out there for a minute.
Hang out here?
Yes,
All
because
right.
we're going to do pictures in just a minute.
Oh,
But
sure.
we wanted to open it up to any jurors who would like to make comments. And Janan, I know you wanted to make
I just wanted to congratulate both teams. You both worked so hard, and it was very evident. And I just commend you all in the hard work you put into memorizing and working through all the questions. I know how much goes into this, so kudos to you. Also wanted to say great job on knowing the courtroom protocols. You guys had respect for the courtroom, and you had respect for each other's teams as well, and I saw that evident several times. So I just wanted to say great jobs to both teams.
Thank you. Other jurors want to make any comments? They worked really hard, you guys. They had so much writing to do. Yeah, did you need something?
Just before pictures.
Yes, okay. So we wanted to announce the winner. We know that really what matters is all the hard work that you put in and what you got out of this experience. So although we have to assign numbers and assign a winner, I hope you realize that you all won because of the work you put in and the experience you got out of this. Okay? So our final scores, the way this works is we average all the jurors' scores, and then we add them to the judge's score. He has 75 points he can award between the two teams. And for each round. And then the jurors' points, they have a total of 65 points that they can award for each round. So, and then we add up both rounds, and that determines our winner today. So the total points for the Burien team was 175.8, and the total points for the Olympia team was 192.6. This sheet and all of the feedback, because there's feedback for all of you on here, to the Olympia team, and it will be their responsibility to make sure that you get copies of all of this. So congratulations. And actually, when we have both of our directors here, we'd like to present a gift.
Yes. Before I do that, Judge Nelson,
yes.
Do you have a verdict for us? Because I know
we forgot to ask about the verdict.
All right. So the verdict in both matters was guilty of murder. It was. Most cases tend to really lean one direction or the other, and this was definitely a prosecution-friendly case. There was no question about who did it. It was close, I will say, but definitely the verdict would have been guilty of murder in both instances. So great job to both teams because you both won.
Okay, again, on behalf of the families and all the students, I just want to say that this event would not have happened today without the hard work of two very important people here. And I would like to say that as a parent, I am so grateful to both of you for the time that you have put in to helping these students prepare, the work that I know that you have done Monday through Monday, 24/7 in preparing for this. You've taken these students, for those of you that don't know, these students spend one day a week as a group in community, and they kind of go over 6 strands, basically 6 kinds of topics. Logic, Latin, they do current events where they take an event from what's going on around town, homeless shelters, for instance, some very important topics like right to life and abortion. And they discuss these, and they go over the pros and the cons of both of these. They present their writing, they discuss science, they do science experiments, and this all happens because these 2 women here spend hours preparing for that and then spend time with these kids. And not only do they do a great job preparing academically, intellectually for all of that, but they keep these kids centered, they keep these kids kind and respectful, and I am, as a parent, and I know I speak for all of you here, just really grateful for your work. And so this is just a small token, but I just didn't want it to go without acknowledging the hard work that the 2 of you done. And so thank you very much. Can you both stand up?
At this time, we'd like to invite both teams to come up, and Judge Nelson will put on his robe, and we'll get a picture all together. And then after that, we are dismissed for the day. We'd encourage families and friends to help with the final cleanup, and then we'll be out of here. So, team.